Okay, well, I want to give Sally as much time as possible, so I'm just going to get started here really quick. Again, I want to make sure as we start this session to thank our sponsors, the Ribera Law Firm, the Lamothe Law Firm, MK Safety Net, and our friend Mitch Garabedian. We started this day off hearing from a very powerful woman from Germany. Now we get to follow that up with another very powerful woman, this one from Florida. Sally Zakhari is a survivor of clergy abuse, and she is the founder of the Coptic Survivor Movement. She's a leader in fighting for the rights of survivors and has helped blaze a trail for other survivors from the Coptic Church, as well as provided an example of the power that social media can have to force change. So with that, Sally, very excited to hear what you have to say. Please go ahead.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much for the intro. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited for this. I've been waiting for this and preparing for weeks, months. Actually, it's just such an honor to be one of the speakers this year. I remember my first SNAP conference was about 10 years ago, and I was just this shy, kind of nervous little survivor that never really met other survivors of clergy sexual abuse. And I found myself in a conference room and watching just speaker after speaker, survivor after survivor go up and speak and share their stories. And it was just such a huge, turning point in my life, and such a great experience to actually be in the same room as people that understood my pain and understood what it takes to survive clergy sexual abuse. And that strength is just something that is remarkable. So I'm so honored to be among such amazing speakers. I'm excited to hear everyone. I just watched Doris earlier share, and it was just so heartbreaking. And she's obviously done some really incredible work to end clergy sexual abuse. So I will start my presentation. Let's see, I can get this up. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. Having technical difficulties a little bit. I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening.
Sally, do you need a bit of help?
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck. I don't know what happened.
Okay, stop your share screen first and we'll restart that.
Okay.
Okay, now go to your share screen.
Okay.
Okay. Do you have your slides ready and open?
Yeah, it minimized kind of in a small square in the corner. I'm sorry, guys. I'm kind of challenged in this.
Zach, do you have her slides open for to help?
I do. I can run them, no problem.
Okay.
Is that okay, Sally?
Sure. Yeah. Oh gosh, why is this not working? Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Okay. So, my name is Sally Zakhari. I'm the founder of the Coptic Survivor Movement and the organization. And so let's get started. Okay. All right, so I'm going to provide you with a little brief summary of what I'm going to be going over today. So I was sexually abused by a pedophilic Coptic priest when I was 12 years old. I've been taking action for almost 2 decades now to have my abuser defrocked. No Coptic priest has ever been removed from priesthood for sexual abuse in the entire 2,000-year-old history of the Coptic Church. So this was something really obviously almost impossible to accomplish, but we did it. So I'm going to share that story with you all. throughout the years, I reported to church leaders, to the police, and eventually, well, when I reported to the police, my statute of limitations had expired. I will explain later a little bit more in detail. And finally, after almost a 20-year struggle, we finally got the Pope to laicize this abuser. But it was a huge fight. In 2020, the Pope had given me his final decision that the church will never defrock this abuser, even though he was already confirmed by the church's own investigation that he was guilty of not only molesting me as a child, but multiple other children and sexually assaulting and raping women. So I'm just glad that we got this pedophile out of priesthood. When I went through, at one point, I had access to a bunch of legal documents through the for the church, and this abuser's name popped up more than any of the other abusers' names in the files. So I'm glad that we finally got him out. This is the post right here that I first shared when I first exposed this priest on social media. And that's really what started the entire movement, is just this one single post. And I had no idea that it would even spark this movement. So we'll go on to the next slide, please. So before we get into my whole story, I want to tell you a bit about what is Coptic and what is Coptic Orthodox. So Coptic is it means Egyptian. And the word Copt is derived from the word Egypt or Gipt, which translates to Copt. Copts are the native Christians of Egypt, and they're the direct descendants of ancient Egyptians. And the Coptic language is actually derived from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. It's kind of similar to Greek. You can see an alphabet here in the lower corner, and some of the hieroglyphics and just some ancient Egyptian inspirations here. And basically, when the Islamic reign started in Egypt, Arabic became the main language. Coptic became a dead language. It's rarely used now. It's only really spoken by just a handful of people really around the world. But we use it in church. We use 3 languages usually in church: Coptic, Arabic, and English, or depending on where you are in the world, the language of the land there. So now I'm going to tell you about what is Coptic Orthodox. So Coptic Orthodox Christianity is a branch of the Oriental Orthodox Christian Church. It's one of the earliest Christian denominations, and it was actually founded by one of Christ's disciples, St. Mark, who wrote one of the 4 Gospels. This was just after Christ, and it was in Alexandria, Egypt, where the religion was established by St. Mark. So Coptic actually, it usually refers to Christian Egyptians, and while most ethnic Copts are Coptic Orthodox Christians, not all Copts are Orthodox Christian. Hope that makes sense. So, and there's approximately 20 million Copts around the world. So there's a good number of us, and a lot of abusers among us for sure. So we'll go on to the next slide. So, oh, I'm sorry, little fun fact. Copts have this little tattoo on their wrist. In the last slide, I have it as well. If you see this little cross tattoo on someone's wrist, most likely they are Coptic Orthodox. So the Coptic Orthodox hierarchy consists of a Pope, the Holy Synod, which is about 130 bishops, metropolitans, and vicars, and some general bishops. Now the Pope, the Coptic Church actually has its own Pope, and currently it's Pope Tawadros II. He was ordained since 2012. Prior to that, it was Pope Shenouda III, and before that, it was Pope Kyrillos. Pope Kyrillos and Pope Shenouda are known to be, almost, Pope Kyrillos for sure is recognized as a saint. Pope Shenouda, I believe he will be or has been recognized as a saint. Unfortunately, Pope Shenouda was one of the popes that failed me. him and Pope Tawadros both. So I'll explain a little bit more as we get into the story. Other Coptic leaders include vicars, hegemons, priests, monks, nuns, and priests in our religion are allowed to be married, but typically they are a married man first and then chosen to be a priest after. The general chain of command is usually a priest reports to a bishop, the bishop reports to the pope. So in general, that's how it works. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Just a little background. I was born in 1986 in Orlando, Florida. I was the first American born Egyptian in my family. So I'm a first generation Egyptian American. I come from a family of very deeply rooted Coptic Orthodox Christians. In fact, my maternal great-grand uncle is canonized as a saint. His name is Habib Girgis, and in the year 1900, he actually established Sunday school, which turned into an entire Sunday school movement around Coptic churches around the world, and continued to grow until, now we have just Sunday school and just so many services. So I guess it runs in the family to start movements in the Coptic church. I think I just started a little bit of a different kind of movement than my great-grand uncle. So growing up, the church was my entire life. It was my identity. I identified as Coptic Orthodox proudly. The church was my second home. I spent a lot of time at church with friends from church. My family and I would meet at church all the time, and my entire life revolved around church. I was very involved. I was an active servant. I participated in the choir, plays. I attended pretty much every camp, convention, and retreat in the area. I started and led outreach groups in different communities in Florida. I organized fundraisers, and my biggest service of all was that I served as one of the two directors of the largest Coptic basketball league in the US, actually possibly even in the world. And we actually had the largest attendance out of all events in the United States and Canada, I believe. So I served for 15 years as the director, but when I decided to come out and share what happened to me last year, I was immediately removed from the basketball league as the director with really no explanation besides that I'm going against the diocese that I'm serving. So it doesn't matter if they were right or wrong. Got to keep up with appearances. So the priest involved in the basketball league, who was actually my spiritual father for about 15 years, he removed me and completely turned his back on me, actually, the day that I decided to come out. So growing up, again, in an Egyptian household as an American child was extremely difficult. I grew up in a very strict and religious household, and that's just how the Coptic community is. Very conservative, very strict. We don't talk about anything sexual ever. There's no sex education. There's really no safe space to even talk about it. Or, once this happened to me, I'd never been spoken to before about any type of sexual anything or abuse. So it was terrifying to even say the words sex or sexual abuse to people in my family and my Coptic community. My parents were also very active in the church, and they had close relationships with a lot of bishops and priests, and they always thought it was a blessing whenever we have a priest or bishop coming over to visit. They always hosted bishops and priests at our house that were in town and would invite people over to come see them. And it was just such a huge blessing to have them in our home. My house is pretty much a revolving door for Coptic priests and bishops for as long as I can remember, since I was a little girl. Here are some photos. Actually, the first two photos on the left are with a priest named Father Pishoy Salema. I'll tell you a little bit more about his involvement later, but he is pretty much currently my only ally in the Coptic Church. He's put his priesthood on the line, and Pope Tawadros has threatened to remove him from priesthood if he continues to associate with me or support the Coptic survivor movement or mention anything about clergy sexual abuse on social. And then here's some other photos of me in the basketball league and with other clergymen, and a bishop on the right here. That was a good friend of mine before he passed away. So next slide, please, Zach. Okay, so trigger warning. I'm not going to get into too much detail. I did share the details of my abuse on social media last year when I first came out and exposed what happened. But I will tell you the overall, events of what happened. This was my nightmare that I'm still living every day. It's kind of just part of my life now that I'm adjusting to still every day, that this actually happened to me and is part of my history. So when this priest actually abused me, it was 1999. I was 12 years old, and I was a member of the Coptic church in the Oviedo, Florida area. Now, the priest there was relocating to California. I didn't really know the reasons why at the time, besides that he and the bishop didn't get along, was what we were told. Later, I found out that he is also an abuser who abuses young men. That's another story. So when my priest at this church moved away, we needed a substitute priest until a permanent priest was sent to us. So that's when my abuser came into the picture. A priest named Ruwais Aziz Khalil came to the US, straight to Florida, straight to my home from Egypt. And he stayed at my house for weeks at a time. He stayed at other people's homes. I did contact the other families that I knew that he stayed with to make sure everyone was okay and ask if anyone in their households were affected. Some of them were even my girlfriends. And so luckily nobody else in the area was affected that I know of. But yeah, so he would go around to different homes, but he'd always come back and stay with us for, again, weeks at a time. It was just dreadful every time he was coming back. He stayed in my bedroom, as most of our guests and priests and bishops would. My bedroom doubled as the guest room. I kept it really nice and tidy when I was younger. So it doubled as the guest room, and I would just stay in my sister's room. So one day, Ruiz, the abuser, convinced my mom to let him take me to a private room for my first confession. He convinced her, she said, well, my daughter had never confessed before. So I thought she was too young for that. And he convinced her that I should start right away at a young age, and that he would be willing to facilitate that. So my mom called me. I could already hear them talking about it, kind of eavesdropping as a little kid, and just dreading, just hoping that she wouldn't agree. And I heard her agree, and I knew it was just terrifying. So I talked to other friends at church who were older that told me, that confession is so intimidating, and they just made it sound really scary. So, who wants to sit and tell their most private secrets to a man and then kind of be judged for it? So he took me to my bedroom and closed the door and told me to sit on the bed, and he began to molest me. And so my first kiss was with a priest. I was able to block him or stop him from going below the waist, but above, there was nothing I could do. So after he was finished, he turned around and looked at me before he would open the door to let me out. And he said, "Now remember, we never tell anyone what happens in confession." And he wouldn't let me out until I nodded an agreement. So I did. And sure enough, I really actually couldn't tell anyone for almost 5 years. So next slide, please, Jack. Okay, so my silence. So after this pedophile abused me, he continued to stay at our house for weeks at a time again and continued to try to convince my mom repeatedly that I should sit with him for confession again. When my mom would ask me if I wanted to confess, I'd firmly refuse. I tried to avoid him, but sometimes I was forced to be around him. And I even had to take communion from his hands. It was extremely traumatizing to have to do that, but I felt like sometimes I had to just cooperate with what was happening around me, because people would start asking questions like, "Oh, why are you saying this about him? And why, you shouldn't talk about a priest that way. And, how come every time we bring him up, you get upset?" And I would just make up lies and say that, he is annoying and he takes up my bedroom and I don't like it. And people just had no idea that I was screaming silently and suffering inside for almost 5 years. Whenever people would say that they miss him and want him back in town, it would freak me out. I insisted that he would not come back to our house. I'm just actually shocked that no one really noticed or thought anything at the time, because I feel, looking back, that I did change a lot, and there were a lot of signs that, this priest was doing something wrong. So we'll go on to the next slide, please, Zach. So finally broke my silence when I was 16 years old, around 2003. The first 3 adults I told were members and leaders of the church, actually. I first told, at the time that I came out, we had 2 priests, one seasoned priest and one new one. The older priest's wife was the first adult that I told, and she advised me to go to my spiritual father, which was the newly ordained priest at our church. Now, right before he was ordained, which was just months before I talked to him about this, he was a licensed physician, and actually I believe he is still a licensed physician. So definitely a mandated reporter at the time I told him, and I was still a minor. He advised me to forgive and forget, and then told me that, if I told him I couldn't forgive and forget, even months later. I went home, tried to forgive and forget. It wasn't really working. So he told me to talk to the bishop of our diocese, Bishop Yusuf. He is the head of the Southern United States Diocese and has covered up for a good amount of abusers, both in and out of his diocese. He's also a member of the Holy Synod that I mentioned earlier, which is, again, the Holy Synod is made up of about 130 hierarchs, and they pretty much control everything in the Coptic church and religion, along with the Pope. So when I first told the bishop, I was about 17, and around 2003, 2004. And when I told him, I was shocked at his response, because he said, "I'm sorry. And I'm already aware of this. There were several other victims before you that told me." So the action that he took is that he banned Ruiz from his diocese, which is essentially washing his hands of this abuser, and relocated him to Egypt, and told me that the Pope would be handling it, and that I should not ever question the Pope's authority, and that I should trust the Pope to handle this properly. And he advised me to forgive and forget. for, multiple times I spoke to him after that because it just didn't sit right with me that I didn't know where this abuser was or what happened to him. And he would find ways to shift blame onto me or change the subject completely. He would, just divert in any way that he could, even if he had to find something to blame me for. He promised that the Pope was handling it, and I wanted to know, is this priest still serving? Where is he in the world? Did the Pope, make him sit out from service, or what's going on? The Pope is handling it. Everything's fine. You need to just forgive and forget and move on with your life. Stop asking questions. And I was never informed of really what happened to him until I had to find out on my own later on when this priest kept popping up in different places. So I finally, when I was in college, my mom was real worried about my spiritual life while I was away in Tallahassee at college, and always wanted to make sure that I was attending the church there and attending confession regularly. My mother had no idea that I had PTSD from confession and just too traumatized to sit through a real confession. My spiritual father, the one that I first told, he kind of worked with me on, I would sit and talk to him almost as a friend or a counselor, but I would just have a panic attack if I was in a actual confession setting. So my mom called me one day to harass me about going to church and are you confessing? And I said no. And she started harassing me about that. And I just finally exploded and told her I'm not going to confession anymore because I was sexually abused in confession by Ruiz. She was shocked. I think she let out a little bit of a scream cry. And eventually she told my dad, and together, the three of us, we started contacting pretty much every bishop that we knew, and my parents know a lot of bishops, and asked them, what's going on? And we wanted this priest to, at the very least, be stopped from service. At one point, I even suggested, because I saw that there was no way, it was almost impossible, that what I was asking for was impossible, that I wanted a priest to be a sexually abusive priest to be removed from priesthood. That was just something it never happened in the church and was never going to happen. So I even negotiated at one point and said, hey, listen, how about remove him from priesthood and, instead of paying him a salary to abuse children, why don't you put that towards therapy for this guy? Get him therapy so that he doesn't continue to abuse others and, even condemn himself to eternal damnation with his sins. And, it was like, I cared about even helping this guy's soul. And I wanted the church to support his family financially, even after, if they were to remove him. I even said we should support his family. They have nothing, it's not their fault what happened. And I'm sure they'd be traumatized by this as well. So pretty much I was just told by bishops that they have nothing to do with it. They're not responsible. Even the ones that were directly responsible and directly had Ruiz under their care and service, just denied any responsibility, shifted blame over to the Pope, and told me that I should write a letter to Pope Teledros. I wrote many letters and I sent emails. I had letters hand delivered to the Pope, and I had bishops confirm to me that the Pope was patient because, okay, I'll say that part over. So this is very infuriating, but I was told by so many people, adults in the church, priests, bishops, that the Pope has so many bigger problems than mine, and he likely doesn't have time for my problem, and he'll get to it when he can. So I'm just asking, what is bigger than priests sexually abusing children? It's There's nothing bigger than that. Immediately when a pope receives a report like this, immediately that should be the one and only priority to take care of. Nothing is bigger than that. So we'll go to the next slide, please, Zach. I started taking more action, and the more I received resistance from Coptic leaders, the more I pushed for action. Along the way, I connected with other Coptic survivors, just very few. Unfortunately, I even knew some of them. Some of them were girls that I grew up with and I was close to. It's just heartbreaking to know that even my friends, some of my friends suffered through this. And we didn't even know that both of us were suffering at the same time for years because we were silenced. And a lot of survivors just, they connected with me, but it was just too much pressure from the Coptic community and a lot of spiritual abuse to silence survivors. Families discouraged survivors and would tell them that they would ruin their reputation. You're going to ruin the reputation of our family. You're going to ruin your reputation if you come out and tell people that this happened to you. Just absolutely disgusting ways to silence survivors in our culture and community. As time went on, I started to see that this was clearly a huge systemic cover-up and that the church was never going to take proper action. Honestly, I never thought of going to the police from the beginning. I was a child. I didn't even know I had rights. I didn't even know or understand the severity of this crime. I didn't know what to do besides just go to my most trusted leaders. The leaders of the church. I even told them before my own parents. And they kind of just wasted my time making empty promises that they would take care of it. The Pope is taking care of it. And they just wasted all my years that I had possible in my statute of limitations. And by the time I finally went to the police in 2013, I was informed that my statute of limitations had expired. That was devastating to me, but I continued to fight and take action in any way that I could. I spent a lot of time with other survivors that I met randomly. It was like the universe or God was bringing us together. I just connected with survivors almost everywhere I went. It was really odd. I volunteered at women's shelters and even got to know other survivors and saw what they were going through. And it gave me, a lot of strength to just keep going with this fight. I started researching more about clergy sexual abuse and what I was feeling and what I was experiencing. I wanted to understand my own trauma and heal from it. So that's around the time that I also discovered SNAP. So it was discovering SNAP was a huge turning point for me because I never knew that other survivors of clergy sex abuse really existed, especially on this large of a scale. Later on, I watched the movie Spotlight and saw how much, the start of SNAP and how they exposed the Catholic Church with the Boston Globe. It was just an incredible story. And it just empowered me to continue on my journey. And I felt like I had support from, the leaders at SNAP and fellow survivors. And, although it brought us together, it was obviously under horrible circumstances, but it did provide at least a little bit of comfort and motivation and gave me hope that there are people working towards ending clergy sexual abuse, and I definitely wanted to join that fight. So we'll go to the next slide, please, Zach. Impossible. That's a word I heard too many times on my journey. I was told that it was impossible, again, to remove a priest from priesthood for sexual abuse, although there were priests being removed for way lesser crimes like changing their beliefs and heresy, which was not harming anyone. So after years of fighting and insisting that that my abuser be defrocked, they finally suspended my abuser and even sent me a copy of his suspension. However, this abuser kept popping up all over the US and Canada, serving at different churches. I would find out without even looking for him. And obviously he was not really suspended. I was lied to, and they fabricated this suspension, or maybe they created this suspension and he didn't follow it. Either way, he was never really stopped from service. Next slide, please. So what led to the movement is in 2019, Pope Tawadros gave a vicar permission to open an investigation on Ruiz. And this vicar had actually come in contact with Ruiz because Ruiz went to his area in Chicago looking for a job. So the vicar approached the Pope and convinced him to open an investigation. In 2019, October, I was contacted by this vicar. I participated in the investigation. I provided so many witnesses, and but I hadn't heard anything back since October 2019 till June 2020. When I reached out to the investigators, they told me that they did find Ruiz guilty of pedophilia and that he was guilty of definitely abusing me. And they were surprised that I hadn't heard from the Pope yet. So I demanded that the Pope provide a final answer, finally, and just put an end to my decades-long journey of just not really having any real answers or resolutions. On 6 months after the investigation was hand-delivered to the Pope, this was June, I was informed on June 11th, 2020, that the Pope made the final decision that Ruiz would never be removed by any Pope or bishop, although he was found guilty. And the investigators were actually forbidden by the Pope from sending me the investigative report. So I had no evidence. Next slide, please. That was my breaking point. Again, sorry, I kind of skipped, but is Ruiz going to be removed from priesthood or not? And that's when I finally got my final answer, July 11th, 2020. That night I went home and I was in just extreme distress, and I contemplated what I would do after that. And I just talked to God, and it was actually my first time separating Christ from the Coptic church. And I saw and heard him like never before. It was like Christ was telling me, I prepared you for this your entire life. You are ready. It's time. And I knew that it was time to get on social media and expose the Coptic church. Next slide. Okay. So just hours after getting this bad news, the morning of July 12th, 2020, that was the start of the Coptic survivor movement. Again, this was what I posted on social media. This is a Coptic priest named Ruiz Aziz Khalil. He is a pedophile. The Coptic church hierarchy has been aware for about 20 years and refuses to remove him from priesthood. He is not the only one. I will keep posting until Pope Tawadros responds. So that post sparked, it went viral, and it sparked a 6-day global social media campaign to defrock my abuser. So many Coptic survivors from around the world reached out to me for help. During that week, I discovered 12 more victims of the same abuser that were abused after I had reported him to the church. And I also discovered that this abuser was actually abusing children in Egypt, in Minya, prior to the church sending him to the US directly to my home. Pope Shenouda was aware of this, and the Minya diocese and their bishops. So 6 days of hell went by. I was attacked, of course, by so many people and had to defend myself. And I had 17 years worth of evidence and documents, and I just posted all of it on social media. And it was just undeniable. People couldn't accuse me of lying anymore. I had just everything to refute all the claims that the church made against me. And then finally, on Friday, July 17th, 5 days into it, a copy of the investigative report was leaked to me, and that was a miracle. I ended up blackmailing the Pope. I sent the photos of the report to the Pope, and I threatened to release the report if he doesn't excommunicate and laicize my abuser. Just hours later, the next morning, Saturday, July 18th, I became the first and only Coptic survivor to successfully have her abuser laicized. The Pope didn't excommunicate him, so I released the investigational report to the public. The next morning, the gospel reading was Matthew 18. If anyone causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. That to me was clear that God was involved in this journey from the beginning. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I think we're running out of time. I'll try to get through this. This is just the papal decree laicizing my abuser. So the power of social media, I mean, the church turns out cares about its reputation and money more than they do about their victims. And social media gave me the platform I needed to challenge the church's reputation with the truth, and it helped me succeed in my decades-long battle against their corruption. History was made, a movement was started, survivors had a platform to share their stories and ask for help and support. And yeah, so that's pretty much what I'll continue using in my movement, and to keep spreading education and try to prevent more of this abuse from happening. Next, please. So I got in contact with a lot of journalists, lawyers, counselors, activists, influencers, a lot from Egypt and around the world. And I was interviewed by so many journalists. There are so many published articles out now. The Associated Press was a huge one, LA Times, Egyptian Streets. It's just, there are articles written in multiple countries now around the world. I've joined allies to work towards ending clergy sexual abuse, raising awareness. And I've even worked with other organizations and activists to campaign to we've actually caught other predators in Egypt through social media and campaigned until they were arrested. And, so I'm just so proud of the work that we're doing and continue to do. I ended up, because of the demand of Coptic Survivor, the movement, I ended up starting a nonprofit organization, Coptic Survivor, which I'm still working on and developing. And we should have a website up soon and officially launch. So next slide, please. Again, this is some information about my organization and plans. We plan to focus on 3 main issues: support, accountability, and prevention. I mean, I see this continuing even after I'm gone, hopefully, and hopefully by that time we would have ended clergy sexual abuse in the Coptic Church. This movement also inspired other Orthodox groups like Transparent Malankara to be established and to start their own activism in their communities as well. So that's all. I think I used up all my time, but if anyone has any questions, here is my contact information. And Zach, do we have any questions that we can take last minute, or are we out of time?
I think that we're about to close the room, but what I would suggest is folks utilize the platform to connect. You can connect with individuals, connect with Sally. I'm sure that she would be happy to answer your questions that way. And you can also do things the old-fashioned way, kick an email to me, I'll kick it to Sally and make an introduction that way. But Sally's so incredibly grateful to you for your work and your courage and your example. You are truly a trailblazer, and your talk touched me so many times. I know that the same is true for the folks who were in the attendance. So thank you so much for being with us today and for your work to protect kids.
Thank you, Zach. And thank you all so much for allowing me to speak and share this with you all. So look forward to hearing from some of you.